Hi, I'm William Spaniel. Let's learn about international relations. Today's topic is preventive war, or preventative war. You can say it either way or spell it either way, as long as you don't use the word preemptive, which is something entirely different that we'll be covering in a few videos later. Regardless, this is what I talk about in Chapter 3 of my new book, The Rationality of War. You can look at the video description to check out that particular book. But that aside, let's talk about the big question for today. The big question is, why do power shifts lead to war? And rather than looking at a full-fledged game theoretical model, I say let's just abandon that and talk about something more interesting and something that you might actually get a little bit more out of. So I'm going to turn this into a bit of a game here where I'm going to give you 3 possibilities why we have power shifts leading to war, and I want you to think about each of those possibilities and then tell me which of those is the actual reason why we have power shifts leading to war. So contestant number 1 is this. Rising states start wars after they have become strong to steal stuff from the declining states. So this is saying that the rising states wait until they've maximized their power, and then once they've become big and strong, then they go and bully the declining state and fight wars against the declining state to get the stuff from the declining state. Option 2 is that declining states choose to fight because they prefer a costly war today to an efficient but disadvantageous peace tomorrow. So that's implying that the future will be peaceful, unlike theory number 1, but that despite the fact that the future will be peaceful for the declining state still wants to fight a war earlier on. And then the last possibility is that power shifts only cause problems when the rising state surpasses the declining state in strength. So that means as soon as that rising state crosses that threshold where it becomes officially stronger than the declining state, if that's going to happen, then you're going to have problems, and we're going to see wars as a result of that. And it's the only way we'll see wars, is if you see this sort of changing of the guard. So those are 3 theories. Think about them now for a second. I want you to consider your options, and if you have the means and availability to you, please write a comment next to the video and submit it to me so I can see it, and we can see who gets it right, who gets it wrong, and if there is a common misconception or if everyone is spot on. So do that now. Pause the video if you have to. Okay, so now let's go through each of these theories one by one. So starting with the top. So rising states start wars after they've become strong to steal stuff from the declining states. So to analyze this, let's refer back to that geometric model that we looked at a couple of videos ago. So this is a geometric model of today's bargaining range. So suppose we just looked at today, we forgot about the future, we pretended the future didn't exist. This is how bargaining would look today between A and B. A is really, really strong right now, which is why we're representing its power with a capital PA. And we know that if power were not to shift, if this were to be how things would look like forever, then the states should be able to reach an agreement somewhere in between PA minus CA and PA plus CB. That's the bargaining range. Those are the set, or that's the set of outcomes that both sides mutually prefer to war. But later in the future, what's going to happen? Well, in the future, power is going to shift, and you're going to be over here, where now A is a lot weaker, B is a rising state, it's risen, and A has declined, it was the declining state. And either way, you're now in this new world where B is a lot stronger, and so we're now down to lowercase PA, A is weaker in comparison. Now, whatever happened in the first stage, whatever happened at the beginning in the today world, doesn't matter once you get into the future. You can't change what's already happened. And so you're at this point at tomorrow, you can only maximize the quality of your outcome today in this time period as opposed to the previous time period, the previous today. And so if you get into this tomorrow world, what happens? Well, you have a new bargaining range, and that means it doesn't make sense for the rising state to fight a war. It doesn't make sense for the declining state to fight a war. Why would either of these guys fight a war when you can end up in one of these outcomes in between PA minus CA and PA plus CB, the new PAs? Then those outcomes are mutually preferred to war in the future. So it doesn't make sense for B, in this case the rising state, to fight a war in this future stage when any of those settlements are mutually preferable to war. The only reason that B would want to fight a war in this case is if A demanded some outcome over here. If A said, oh, yeah, I'm going to just force you to take this or you're going to have to fight a war, then B would want to fight a war in that case. But A knows that demanding something over here is just stupid because that forces B to fight a war. And so A wouldn't do that. They're going to somehow come out to an agreement in this bargaining range. So that means this first theory can't be right. There's no reason why rising states would start wars after they've become strong, because you should end up in a mutually preferable outcome to war. War is still going to be costly in the future. Those costs imply that a bargaining range exists. Done deal. One's not right. What about number 2? Well, we can go back to those images and take a look at them, and we'll see that number 2 is actually looking like a very good candidate. Why is that? Well, here are both of those images. You have today's bargaining range and tomorrow's bargaining range. Put yourself in the shoes of the leader of A. You're in control of A's army. Do you want to fight a war today? Well, looking pretty good if you do. Why is that? Well, whatever happens tomorrow, it's going to be something in between here and here, right? Don't know exactly where it's going to be necessarily, but the best you can possibly hope for is right here at PA plus CB, the lowercase PA plus CB. That's the best you can possibly hope for if you're A. Compare that to what happens if you try to just shut down B right now. If you fight a war, try to destroy B, sort of just take its head off right now while you're still big and strong, then your outcome is right here. And that means that outcome that you're trying to lock in with a preventative war today, ooh, that slipped, then that's going to be better for you than letting this world advance until tomorrow and getting a bargain settlement somewhere in here. So you actually prefer fighting a war today and getting your war payoff than letting the world advance into this tomorrow stage when you're much weaker. So that's the reason why A would want to fight a war here. It just gets more from this costly war than it does from this efficient piece of tomorrow. So number 2 looks really good. Thumbs up to that. That's a good theory. What about number 3, though? Power shifts only cause problems when the rising state is declining, or when the rising state surpasses the declining state in strength. Excuse me about that. Well, we saw a case here where the rising state did, in fact, surpass the declining state in strength. That did cause a war, right? So this was A's power in today, and this is A's power tomorrow. This is about halfway down here right now. And so in this case, A, in fact, did get surpassed by B. B, the rising state, surpassed A, the declining state in strength, and that caused conflict. But remember that this theory says that's the only way this causes a problem. And in fact, this graph here really has nothing to do with it crossing the halfway mark. We can move this to either side and still have the same explanation for war. So if we just shifted everything over to the right, now A and B aren't having a changing of the guard. B is getting stronger compared to A, but A is not ever becoming weaker than B relative to B. A is always still stronger than B. It's just that relative to the time period, A is weaker in the future than it is in the current present. And so as a result, if you check out this right here, you see that if you're the leader of A, you might still want to lock in this war payoff right here because that's better for you than whatever you can get out of the bargaining range tomorrow. And so the changing of the guard here doesn't actually require, you don't have to have a changing of the guard in order to be able to get war. That's not a necessary condition. So we can scratch that off right here. And that just leaves us with theory number 2. Theory number 2 is the correct answer. That's why preventative wars happen. And in fact, for the final definition in the final slide, a preventative war is defined as this. It's when a declining state fights because it prefers a costly war today to an efficient but disadvantageous peace tomorrow. So that is what preventative war is. That's a rationalist explanation for war. We didn't see a full-fledged game theoretical model, but you got the intuition about what's going on there, and that's what's important. And in the next video, we will talk about another rationalist explanation for war, which is asymmetric information and incentives to misrepresent. Join me then. Take care.